It started on a bright morning when I was finally putting the finishing touches on my ranch cabin, a dream that my grandfather and I had nurtured for years, a place built with our own hands, sweat, and countless weekends of labor standing tall, amidst the rolling hills and the towering pines that bordered Willow Creek. This cabin wasn't just a structure of wood and nails. It was a testament to resilience, to generations of hard work and sacrifice, and to the unyielding bond between a grandfather and grandson who shared a vision of freedom and self-sufficiency. Every log laid, every nail hammered, every plank sanded told a story of determination, countless early mornings and long evenings where the only light came from oil lamps and the distant glow of stars peeking through the wide mountain skies as I admired the sturdy log walls and wide wraparound porch that now overlooked the vast meadow. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction I hadn't known in a long time. A piece of land that represented freedom, hard work, and the simple life far from the noise of city bureaucracy. Birds chirped in the distance, and the gentle rustle of pine trees swaying in the breeze provided a soothing background melody to my quiet triumph. But little did I know that my quiet slice of heaven was about to attract the unwanted attention of the Willow Creek HOA, led by the infamous Eleanor, a woman whose name had become synonymous with overreach and manipulation within the community. Eleanor was not your average HOA president. She was a force of nature, wrapped in tailored suits and sharp heels, whose presence sent chills through homeowners and local businesses alike. Many around here whispered about her behind closed doors, but few dared challenge her openly, fearing the endless barrage of citations, fines, and bureaucratic harassment she was known to unleash upon anyone who defied her rules. Her obsessive devotion to the HOA rulebook was legendary. She often twisted its words to suit her own agenda, using technicalities to exert control over even the most minor details of daily life in Willow Creek. That very morning, as I wiped sweat from my brow and prepared to install the final window, shutters, a convoy of black SUVs came crawling up my gravel road, kicking up thick clouds of dust that shimmered in the sunlight like ghosts rising from the earth. Out stepped Eleanor herself, flanked by a group of HOA board members dressed in business attire, clutching clipboards and manila folders, as well as two uniformed police officers who looked somewhat uncomfortable, as if they knew they were being dragged into something unnecessary. Eleanor wasted no time, marching forward with an air of righteous indignation, her heels clicking sharply on the gravel as she waved a thick folder filled with papers. Her voice, sharp and commanding, sliced through the morning air as she demanded that I halt all construction immediately. She claimed that my cabin violated numerous HOA bylaws, zoning restrictions, and setback requirements, and that unless I agreed to demolish the structure voluntarily, the HOA had authorized immediate legal action to forcibly tear it down within 30 minutes. Her accusations came so fast and so absurdly that for a moment I could do nothing but stare at her in disbelief, wondering if this woman had completely lost her grip on reality. Grandpa, ever the steady hand in a storm, stepped forward then, calm but firm, his eyes narrowing as he looked Eleanor squarely in the face. His voice was measured, yet carried the weight of someone who had seen far too many people like her try to wield power recklessly. He asked her on what legal grounds she was making such demands, prompting Eleanor to rattle off a string of bylaws and regulations with the air of someone reciting Holy Scripture. Most of what she cited didn't even apply to my property, but Eleanor was banking on intimidation and confusion to get her way, assuming we would simply cave to her demands like so many others had before. What she didn't know, and what would soon unravel her entire scheme, was that the land my cabin stood on had a very peculiar legal status, one that she had apparently overlooked in her blind ambition. Decades ago, long before the Willow Creek HOA even existed, my grandfather had purchased not just our ranch, but a sizable tract of adjacent land that had once belonged to a defunct mining company. That land was later mistakenly included within. the HOA's boundary maps during an expansion, though legally it was never part of their jurisdiction, a fact that had been quietly filed away in the county records and easily forgotten by all but those who knew exactly where to look. As Eleanor continued her tirade, growing more animated with each passing second, Grandpa calmly walked over to his old pickup truck and retrieved a thick, carefully preserved manila envelope from the glove compartment. Inside were the original land deeds, property maps, tax records, and legal documents that clearly proved our land was not under HOA authority. These weren't just copies. They were notarized originals, stamped and certified, preserved through decades of careful stewardship. He handed the documents to the police officers, who began to review them with professional diligence. As their eyes moved over the pages, their expressions shifted from passive discomfort to quiet realization, reading through the paperwork with growing clarity that Eleanor had no legal standing to be here, let alone threaten demolition. They exchanged glances, their stiff postures softening as the truth became undeniable. Eleanor's face turned a shade of crimson that matched her lipstick, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for some new angle, some fresh legal threat. To throw our way. She sputtered that there must be some mistake, that the HOA's authority was absolute, and that she would escalate the matter to the county if necessary. But even the officers calmly informed her that any such action would be a civil matter for the courts, not something that justified immediate demolition under police supervision, which she clearly lacked. The tension hung thick in the air as neighbors, drawn by the commotion, gathered along the fence line, watching the showdown unfold. Many whispered to one another, some even recording on their phones as Eleanor fumed, realizing her dramatic display of authority was quickly backfiring in a very public and humiliating way. With no legal grounds to stand on, she was forced to retreat, promising that this was far from over, that she would find a way to bring us down, her threats ringing hollow but bitter as she stormed back to her SUV and sped off in a cloud of dust, leaving the officers to shake our hands and quietly apologize for the disturbance, assuring us that as far as they were concerned, no laws had been broken on our part. But we both knew Eleanor wouldn't give up so easily. For her, this was no longer about rules or regulations, but about power, pride, and ego. She had just suffered a very public defeat at the hands of a rancher and his grandfather, two men she clearly underestimated, and her fragile ego would not tolerate such a blow. Sure enough, over the following days, we began to see signs of her next moves. Letters from her lawyers arrived by certified mail, citing obscure statutes and demanding compliance. Code enforcement officers appeared unannounced to inspect everything from our septic system to our fence height. Anonymous complaints were filed with various state and county agencies, each one amounting to nothing more than harassment, thinly veiled as due process. Through it all, we stood firm. We responded with our own legal counsel, documenting every interaction meticulously, building a paper trail that would serve us well when the inevitable court battle arrived. Grandpa's old contacts, seasoned attorneys, and property rights experts rallied to our side, dissecting each frivolous claim with surgical precision, exposing the weaknesses in Eleanor's arguments, and sending polite but firm responses to each legal threat she issued. As the weeks turned into months, word of Eleanor's vendetta spread beyond Willow Creek. Local media picked up the story, followed by regional news outlets, and eventually even national coverage as the narrative of a small-town HOA president trying to seize private land became a viral sensation. Commentators across the country weighed in on the absurdity and injustice of it all, turning Eleanor into a widely mocked symbol of HOA overreach and petty tyranny, while Grandpa and I were painted as the stubborn underdog standing up for individual rights against unchecked authority. The story resonated deeply with many who had faced similar battles in their own communities. Talk shows, podcasts, and viral social media posts dissected the unfolding drama. Memes of Eleanor's red-faced tantrum circulated widely, often accompanied by captions like HOA Karen meets her match and the rancher who broke the HOA. Our once quiet ranch became something of a pilgrimage site for supporters who would drive out, take selfies by our fence, and leave behind small gifts and notes of encouragement. But beneath the media circus and public support, Eleanor's attacks grew increasingly desperate and erratic, leading to a final confrontation that none of us could have predicted, one that would expose the full extent of her corruption and ultimately bring her reign of terror to a dramatic and permanent end. The days following Eleanor's humiliating retreat from my ranch saw a strange combination of tense silence and subtle hostility. For nearly a week, we heard nothing directly from her, but Grandpa and I both knew this was only the calm before the storm. Eleanor was far too invested in her power and reputation to simply walk away after such a very public loss. And sure enough, the storm arrived, this time in the form of legal summons, delivered one crisp morning by a sharply dressed courier who wore a smug grin that suggested he believed he was delivering our doom. The documents inside were thick, bound, and intimidating at first glance. Eleanor had filed a massive civil lawsuit against me, citing an endless list of alleged violations: unlawful construction, environmental damage, interference with HOA authority, nuisance complaints, and even defamation of character. The filing demanded hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, the demolition of my cabin, and permanent injunctions preventing any further development on my property. It was a legal blitzkrieg designed not to win on its merits, but to overwhelm us with paperwork, attorney fees, and court dates until we were financially and emotionally broken. But Eleanor had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated both. Grandpa and me, and more importantly, she underestimated the deep bench of legal expertise that Grandpa could call upon. Decades of friendships and professional favors meant we were soon surrounded by a team of veteran property rights attorneys who knew every inch of land law, HOA limitations, and civil procedure. They carefully dissected Eleanor's lawsuit, finding flaw after flaw, loophole after loophole, and outright fabrications that would turn the entire case against her. The court battle was grueling. Each hearing brought Eleanor into the spotlight again, and each time her confidence wavered as her case unraveled. Our attorneys presented irrefutable land deeds, historic county maps, and sworn testimony from county officials confirming that my property was never under HOA jurisdiction. Her claims of environmental damage were dismantled by expert witnesses who praised the responsible manner in which Grandpa and I had preserved the natural landscape. Even the defamation claims fell apart when her own public outbursts and interviews were played in court, showing that she had willingly brought media attention upon herself. As the months passed, we found ourselves entrenched in a battle that reached far beyond simple property disputes. The entire town of Willow Creek became captivated by the unfolding drama. Local newspapers ran daily articles, television crews set up camp outside the courthouse, and national commentators debated the case on talk shows. The legal circus surrounding our fight turned our humble ranch into a symbol of resistance against overreaching authority. What struck me most was how our neighbors, many of whom had lived in fear of Eleanor's wrath for years, began to find their voices. They shared their own stories of harassment, threats, and unjust fines levied against them for the most trivial of infractions: a fence too tall, grass an inch too long, a shade of paint deemed inappropriate. It became clear that Eleanor's reign had been one of fear and intimidation. One by one, whistleblowers from within the HOA came forward. They brought with them damning evidence, secret recordings of HOA meetings where Eleanor blatantly manipulated rules to her advantage, documents showing backroom deals with contractors and inspectors, and internal emails filled with threats to silence dissenters. The depth of corruption was staggering. The public support we received grew exponentially. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse at every hearing, waving signs that read, "Freedom over tyranny" and "Stop HOA abuse." People drove for hours to stand in solidarity. National organizations advocating for property rights offered legal assistance and media support. Our fight had become a movement. Eleanor's position grew more desperate with each passing day. Her HOA board began to fracture as members resigned under public pressure, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. Financial strain forced her to liquidate assets to pay for her ever-growing legal bills. Still, she refused to back down, driven by an obsession that blinded her to reality. The newly elected HOA president, Hannah Nichols, a young lawyer with integrity and a genuine desire to serve the community, played a pivotal role in shifting the tide. Hannah publicly denounced Eleanor's actions, dissolved the HOA's involvement in the lawsuit, and implemented sweeping reforms that dismantled the abusive policies Eleanor had put in place. The HOA was no longer her weapon. With her HOA power base gone, Eleanor was left to fight on her own. In a final act of desperation, she filed a new motion in court, claiming that the original land transaction from decades earlier was invalid, due to an obscure clerical error. If true, this would nullify our ownership and potentially return the land to the county for redistribution. It was her last and most dangerous gamble. But once again, Eleanor underestimated Grandpa. He had preserved every document related to the land purchase, from notarized deeds to tax receipts to personal correspondence with county officials. Our legal team tracked down the retired county clerk who had processed the sale, an elderly man with a sharp memory and an even sharper sense of justice. His sworn testimony before the court dismantled Eleanor's fraudulent claim. The judge overseeing the case, a stern but fair man who had grown visibly weary of Eleanor's antics, delivered a scathing rebuke. He ruled that our ownership was legal, and binding, dismissed Eleanor's case with prejudice, and imposed significant financial penalties for her frivolous lawsuits and malicious conduct. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. The long nightmare was finally over. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, her face drained of color, as reporters swarmed her upon leaving the courthouse. Her reputation lay in ruins, her finances decimated, and her name forever synonymous with abuse of power. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek transformed. Freed from Eleanor's oppressive rule, the town flourished. Neighbors worked together to rebuild a sense of true community. The HOA, under Hannah's leadership, became a model of fairness and cooperation. Strict regulations were replaced with common-sense guidelines that respected individual freedoms while maintaining the character of the community. Our ranch became something of a local landmark, visited by supporters who had followed our story. Grandpa's porch was rarely empty, as friends and strangers alike stopped by to share stories, offer thanks, or simply sit under the stars with a glass of sweet tea. The cabin stood as a testament to perseverance, its log walls and wide porch symbolizing the triumph of integrity over corruption. News outlets continued to cover our story, often using it as an example of the dangers of unchecked HOA authority. National debates on property rights cited our case, and legislative proposals were introduced in several states to rein in the powers of overreaching homeowners associations. As for Eleanor, she quietly sold her home at a loss and disappeared from Willow Creek. Rumors circulated about her starting over in another town under a different name, but none of us cared to confirm. Her chapter in our lives was closed. On a cool autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Grandpa and I sat on the porch reflecting on the journey we had endured. The gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of an eagle overhead created a peaceful symphony. "You know, boy," Grandpa said, his voice warm and steady, "it wasn't just about this land. It was about standing up to bullies, Folks need to know that no one has the right to take what's yours just because they wear a fancy title. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. We showed them, Grandpa. We showed them that you can't push people around forever. He raised his glass, the ice clinking softly. To freedom and to family. To freedom and family, I echoed, clinking my glass against his. The stars twinkled above us, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, peace truly settled over Willow Creek. The battle was over, the land was ours, and the future was bright. The cabin, once the center of so much conflict, now stood as a beacon of hope and resilience, a symbol that no matter how fierce the storm, some roots run too deep to be uprooted.